Hello and welcome. We're going to do a hopefully a nice tutorial here on making a landscape, sort of a Martian landscape. So I'm going to start in Blender here. I'm going to turn on my screencast keys so you can see what keys I'm using. Immediately change to Cycles Render, that's what we're going to render in. Change to GPU Compute for speed. I'm going to change my resolution up to full here, and then just very quickly with sampling, just to speed things up as we go, I'm going to change that to say 10 for my preview and say 100 for my render. I can always increase that later if I want. So with no further ado, let's go make things. So I'm going to delete that cube, and then I'm going to go Shift A, Add Mesh, Plane. Now I want to make this nice and big, so I'm going to go S30, so S30, Enter. I'm going to take my camera, I'm going to go G, move it over here and turn it around a little bit. I'm going to look from the side, and I'm going to move this down towards the ground, and then I'm going to click Lock Camera to View and look through the camera, and then let's position this. Let's see, we'll rotate it that way a bit. So basically on this square here, that's one vertex and that's another. So I basically want the landscape to be wider at the back than the camera can see. So I'm going to turn off my lock camera to view. I'm going to select this plane. I'm going to go into edit mode and I'm going to subdivide it and increase the number of subdivisions to 10. Actually go to 14, say. Okay, and that's all good. So we maybe subdivide it one more time. Okay, so now I'm going to go into proportional editing, and I'm going to make my landscape. So I'm going to go GZ and lift this up. Obviously that's not terribly good, so I'm going to use the middle mouse button to sort of zoom out a bit, and we're just trying to make sort of an environment that is, believable. So something as simple as that. Obviously we can still see the faces here, so we'll hit smooth, and we'll leave that like that for now. Now we're going to add an environmental texture in a couple of minutes. So we'll go to our light and we'll change that to being a sun, and we will hit use nodes, and for now we're just going to rotate this a little bit. Actually, we'll rotate it that way, so we'll cast a shadow off these kind of two mounds across the landscape. So let's just rename these things. So this is called a plane, so we'll call this the ground. Now the next thing I'm going to do is make a rock, so let's just go do that. So Shift A, Add Mesh, Cube. We'll go have a look at that cube. So there it is, and we're going to go into edit mode. Actually no, we don't need to even go into edit mode. We will rename it rock first of all, and we will take that rock and we will add a subdivision surface modifier to it, change it to 2 here in the view so we have more geometry, and then we're going to hit apply. So now that was my rock, or my cube, and I'm going to go G. Now the whole thing moves when I do that, and that's because this proportional editing is still on. So I'm trying to I want to make this look more like a rock, so select it all, scale it on Z, make it a bit flatter, and just trying to get the okay, and so that's fine for now, and again set that to be smooth. So I have one rock, and I'm going to duplicate this, so Shift D, and we will call this rock 1, and we're just going to very simply go into edit mode and change its shape a little bit. so that they don't look the same. So that's all I want to do. Okay, so we've got rock 1, rock 2, we can leave them there, there's no problem. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to save this first of all. So we'll go File, Save As, and we'll call it Mars. And I have a little folder on my desktop called Mars, so we'll save that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to try and populate these rocks around the environment and make it look a little bit more interesting. But before I start making lots of these rocks, let's texture the environment and texture the rocks. So I'm going to change my outliner here into a second 3D view. I'm going to look through the camera, and I'm going to turn that into rendered mode so we can see how things look. So I'm going to take my landscape, go into edit mode, select it all, and go U, unwrap, and see what we get in our UV image editor. So that's it there, and I'm going to open an image. Now where did I put that? Did I put it in here? Here it is there, Mars soil. So I'm going to open this image here. It's a tileable texture of kind of mud. So let's go do some texturing. So I'm going to change this to be the node editor. And we've done this quite a few times before. So I'm going to select the default material, which was made in Blender Render, not Blender Cycle, so we have to click this Use Node button. And we've kind of got used to now, we select our diffuse shader, we delete it, and we add in the principal shader, connect that there, and then we're going to add in our image texture, which is this one, and then we plug that in there. Now we have a problem. So if I look over here in material mode, it looks the same. So it's the scale of it's all wrong. So we need to scale this up enormously. Now this is a tileable texture, so we'll start to see repeat patterns here. So we have to be careful with that. However, that's enough for now. It'll keep us happy. So and we'll come back and we'll play with this a little bit later. So going to object mode, you can see the repeat pattern there. I'm going to do the same here with my rocks, my two rocks. So I'm going to go select one, go into edit mode, select it all, go U, unwrap. Actually, I'll use Smart Unwrap or Smart UV Project. Oops. And okay, and we'll use the same material. Only this time we won't scale it. And same here. So unwrap, Smart UV Project, and material. So now these two rocks should look have the same texture as the landscape. Okay, so we're not in too bad shape now. So let's just, this rock's not visible, so let's go GZ and lift it up a little bit. I won't worry about it too much. Okay, so let's make this look a bit more interesting. So I'm going to do the sky next, and then I'm going to start using particle systems. So for the environment, so I'm going to click in here in the environment and go use nodes, and then the node editor, click on environment. So for this environment, instead of using a sky, because Mars doesn't have clouds, and I could just make it kind of red. Well, that would be fine, but I want to give it a slight pattern. So I'm going to use a procedural texture. So this is different to using an image texture. This is like a pattern generated within Blender. And we're going to use a Voronoi pattern, which looks a bit like a spider's web. And we're going to then add what's called a color ramp. And this color ramp is going to give us a bit of control over our spider's web. So there's our spider web kind of pattern, or Voronoi pattern. And these two colors are the two colors of that Voronoi pattern, and this is the scale of it. So I can make lots more cells, or I can make it a bit more the opposite bit. Let's give it a scale of 1, so it's a bit more kind of like a gradient. And then here I'm going to select, I'm going to lift this up from black and make this sort of a dark brooding red color, almost like a a space kind of sky, and I'm going to do the same here. So it's going to be kind of a red color, and you can play around with that. You can actually add in more gradients and have it look a little bit more interesting if you want. And keep in mind that this is an environmental image, so it will illuminate the landscape as well. So you can have all sorts of fun with this and make the landscape darker and more gritty, etc. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a particle system. So let's have let's change our view here a little bit for this, so we can see what we're doing. And I'm just going to very quickly go to material mode. Actually, no, I'll stay on solid mode. So I'm going to take this here, and I'm going to go over to my particle systems, which is this little tab here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit new, and it's going to say a new particle system. Now, I don't want an emitter, because that'll make it rain or do other things. It doesn't rain, I don't think, on Mars. I'm going to choose hair, and I'm going to get all these hair particles, and you can see them immediately in the camera view, and they look cool. Like, you could leave it like that and make some crazy alien worlds, but we're not going to do that. We're going to exchange the hair for rocks. So how we do that is, after we've selected hair, we can go down here and then change from path to object, and then tell it what object to use. And we're going to pick the first rock. So here's my first rock. Now, if I don't like the orientation of the rock on the ground, so see it's kind of on its side, I can take the rock. So this is rock I've selected, so I can take this, I can go into edit mode, and as you can see, it's like I'm in edit mode for every single rock. And when I rotate this, I'm rotating every rock on the surface. So what I should really do with this is rotate them that way, so they're flatter. Now, the location of this rock is irrelevant, so I can just move this off screen and then I won't see it. So now let's go back to my landscape here, and I can change. So these rocks actually look quite well. And it's going to increase random size, so some of them are bigger and smaller, etc. And then I can actually change the size of these rocks and how they appear. Now, keep in mind that most of the action here is right in front of the camera. So this is what's interesting. The rest of it's kind of important, but not as important. So what I can do now with this particle system is I can go into particle edit, and this is basically, I can brush it like it's hair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the particles, I'm going to go to cut and leave the strength to 1, which means I'll get rid of all of them. I'm going to remove the particles from the tops of the hills. You wouldn't normally have a particle on the top of a hill, it would roll down, although these aren't terribly big hills that we have here. And just going to do that. And then what we'll do is we'll add them at the bottom of the hill, as if they'd been kind of gathered. I'll add more particles in there. I'm going to go F. F changes the size of the brush here, so I can put sort of like a path of particles going across here. Now, cool. So we'll go back to our object mode, and that's what we've got. Now, if we don't like that, we can go back in and brush it again. We can't change the number of particles now. Our starting number was 1,000. In order to change any of the initial conditions, I can still change size, etc. I would have to go free edit, and then I would lose all of the kind of the particle painting that I've done. So I'm going to reduce the size of these just a little bit. This is going to be sort of like, I want this to be sort of my background noise. There we go. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into wireframe mode and select these two guys here, and I'm going to go Control G and make a group. Now, I could make a group from 10 rocks if I wanted, but I'm just going to use 2 as an example here. I'm going to go back to my landscape, and I'm going to add another particle system. Hit plus here, and I'm going to call this Big Rocks, because I'm that original. And the smaller particle, the other particle system here, is locked for now. So go here, so Big Rocks. And again, we'll make this hair, but instead of having 1,000 particles, we'll go to 100, because these are going to be Big Rocks. Okay, so instead of selecting object now, I'm going to select group. Now, when I made this group, I didn't name it, so we're just going to go into the object properties, and we'll see here that it's in a group that we've put it in, and the group's called group, so which is not great, so let's call this rocks, just so you can see where, you know, if it was in, it could be in a couple of groups, and then we could name them all. So if I go back to my landscape and my particle effects, and I go to group, I get to select the group now, and the group is called rocks. Now, nothing seems to have changed too much. We've only got 100 of them, but these again will increase the randomness of their size, but we're going to make these much bigger, and you can start to see them here on the on our landscape. And again, their shape is you know, definitely not how we want them to look. So let's go into edit mode for this, and we will rotate it 90 and make it more flush to the landscape. Now let's go back here. Now, they all seem to be the same, and that's because we need to click this button here, pick random. So it's going to randomly pick between the 2 rocks in the group. So if I had 10 rocks, it would randomly pick one of those 10. Okay, and again we can go in and we can paint if we want on this particle system. So I can go to cut, and if I think that there's too many right in front of the camera here, I can remove 1 or 2 of them. And if I want to add, I can add in, like say, a clump of large rocks. Okay, and we'll go back to what the camera can see, and object mode, and we'll edit them back to cut, and we'll cut this out here. Yeah, that's not too bad. Okay, and then we're just going to save that file, save. So I'm going to have a quick look at this in rendered mode, and that's not too bad at all. So let's very quickly select this lamp again, go back to rendered mode and see if we can do anything nice with that. So I'm gonna, so we can rotate this and, you know, get full lighting effect from our sunlight. Okay, so some nice shadows there, and then we can go back to our environment. Oops, and our environmental lighting, and we can decrease the strength of it so that we have something, just a faint red glow in a dark sky. So the last thing we're going to do in this tutorial, just to kind of make it, because, you know, obviously we're not just making still images, is we'll go to solid mode and we'll go out and we'll find this, let's make a new window, and we'll make this our outliner. We'll find our camera, there it is there, and we will give it a little animation. So we'll go, we're going to press the, well, let's see what frame we're on first. So we'll make a timeline, and we will, we're on frame 1, we'll make it 4 seconds long, so 100 frames. we'll press I and insert keyframe on location and rotation, and then we'll go to frame 100, and we will move forward to our landscape and maybe move up a little bit, not too much though, and then we'll insert a keyframe here again on rotation and location, maybe give it a little rotation. Okay, so now when we look through our camera, we've got an animation. So this is how we would make our environments. We could green screen a character and place it on this. We could do all sorts of really nice things. Let's before we finish up, let's just finish off our the texturing on this. So this was the image we brought in. We didn't do very much with it, so let's first of all take away the specularity, so we haven't got shiny rocks, and we'll take away the sheen. Whoops. And we can dial back the roughness, maybe bring the roughness up actually. And then the last thing we'll do is we will put in a RGB curves, and actually no, we're on the wrong side. Let me delete that. So let me put that in there. Oops, apologies. So we're going to take our RGB curves and put them in between the image and the shader, and then we can make the dark bits darker and the bright bits a wee bit brighter. Okay, so maybe it's a bit too dark, maybe that's a bit too bright, so we'll find a happy medium. So I'm going to render one frame of that, and we'll see what it looks like. And there's a couple of settings I can change now in the renderer to make it look better, or to speed up, sorry, the rendering process. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. So as we look at it now when it's large, this landscape texture is the pattern on it is there's too many repeats. So I'm just going to escape out of that and just go control up, and let's go fix that. Oops, that's not what I wanted. UV image editor, solid mode, from the top, edit, and edit out this. So this was our Mars soil, so we're going to scale this back a good bit so as not to get too much of that repeat pattern. And also what I might do here is, just because it's quite dark, just so we can differentiate between the rocks that we've added in and the soil, what I'm going to do is give this soil a different material. So I'm going to hit plus here, and we'll call this ground, and the ones that are on the rocks, hang on, where are these rocks? There's one there. Yeah, that's called material. We'll call that rock. So we'll leave that the way it is, and then the one on the ground here we'll make a wee bit brighter. Okay, and then we'll make the first particle system a wee bit bigger. Okay, so let's render that and see what we get. Oh, hang on. We're going to increase our render speed. That's what we said we'd do. So let's do that. So let's go to the render settings, and so our samples are set to 100. That's fine. I'm going to go to my light paths, and I'm going to decrease everything here to about 4. So this is how many paths it has to draw for each frame. And then I'm going to go to performance, and I'm going to make these 256. And 250. And this is the size of the square that it draws. And render that. Okay. That was not what I expected. So, we have had a good old crash. So let's see where we last saved. So we were making this a bit bigger. No, wrong one. This one a bit bigger. Not too big though. And we had unwrapped, changed the UV size on this to about there for that image, and then we had made 2 separate materials, one for the ground, so we'll call this ground, which is not spelled right, but I don't care, and one for the rocks, so we'll go plus, and we'll call this rocks. And we were trying to make the ground, if I turn that on there, a bit brighter. Oh, I have done that incorrectly. Oh no, I haven't. So we're going to make the ground a bit brighter. So we had added in actually, let's just go brightness and contrast. I had added in a RGB curves. Let's just crank it up one there. Okay, so we've done that, and I'm going to save this now, and I don't think my animation is in this, so let's go to my timeline. No, so we'll set this to be 100, and we'll go look through the camera, select the camera, so that's frame 1, so we're going to go insert keyframe on rotation and scale, so rotation and location, move the frame 100, and then we'll go GY, so we'll move forward, give it a little rotation, maybe shift it off here to the right a little bit, and then insert our keyframe. Now the only other things that we had changed there were these things, the render settings, so let's try that again. So light paths were brought down to 4, and my performance, I had changed these to 256. So before we render this, and it's probably a good habit to get into, is we will save, so if it does crash on render, we can just open it again. Now keep in mind, when I'm rendering mine, I'm actually doing a screen recording at the same time. So now I'm just remembering now I did one other thing. I took all the shine off these things. So let's go back and do that before we go any further. So we'll select the ground, and we've removed the specularity and sheen tint, and we'll bring back the roughness. That's for the ground, and then we will select a rock, and we'll do the same with this. We'll take away the specularity and the tint, and we'll leave the roughness there. So we'll try one more render, see what we get, because that should make a big difference. Okay. And then we've one more thing to set, which is sort of based on what we did the last day in class, which was we were setting our depth of field, which will just make the whole thing look that little bit more cinematic. Okay, so I'm not quite sure what that is, what's causing that, but seems to be still a sheen on some things, but we'll go back and we'll check that. But we will escape out of that, and what we're going to do now is we're going to do one more thing, which is this is called rock. So I'm going to go to my camera, and I'm going to go to my depth of field settings, and I'm going to select rock and increase my depth of field up to about 1.5 or 2, or maybe not too far. Okay, and we'll go File, Save, and we'll try one more render. Actually, I'm just going to see if I can select this second rock here. So it has the ground texture on it, so I'm going to go to, so it should have the rock texture on it. I think that might have been what was wrong there. So let's try one more render, and then what I'll do is I'll render out a little video of this. I'll pause this screen recording and I'll play back the video, so you can see the 4-second sort of animation as it goes through. Because if it's 1 minute per frame, it'll take 100 minutes to render. Okay, so this is sort of our strange Martian environment. Maybe that depth of field is too much. Also it looks probably closer to something more microscopic than maybe a Martian landscape, or maybe somebody poured some coffee beans somewhere. So it's not quite right, but you can see if you played around with it, you change the texture images or the image textures, you change the lighting a bit, you can get all sorts of really beautiful effects. So there's plenty of scope and opportunity to play around with it. Cool, so I'm going to pause this and I'm going to render this out as a video. Okay, so welcome back. It took a little while to render, and this is it playing in VLC Player. So it's a 4-second clip. It's just a little loop. Now it's not perfect by any means, but it's a starting point to give you an idea of what is possible. And the addition of depth of field, etc., makes it far more cinematic and far more interesting. So far from a photorealistic landscape, but an interesting one nonetheless. So something for you to work on.